Taking a look at all the latest from around the world and here at home now, it's the ITV Lunchtime News.
Greater freedoms, but at what price? 3, 2, 1. Some celebrate the lifting of restrictions in England, but others are remaining cautious. Ministers insist they are doing the right thing.
But we have severely weakened the link between infection rates and hospitalisation.
But Boris Johnson is among hundreds of thousands forced to isolate. Some businesses say they are struggling to cope. Also this lunchtime, at least 4 people are dead and 2 others missing after a sweltering weekend that led some to dangerous waters. And Britain's Mark Cavendish on his ride into history as he equals a Tour de France record.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Lucrezia Millarini.
Good afternoon. The Vaccines Minister has insisted it is the right time to relax rules in England despite a surge in the number of COVID cases. At midnight, nearly all remaining restrictions were lifted, including an end to social distancing rules. Even with the changes, hundreds of thousands of people have been unable to head into work today after they were pinged by the Test and Trace app. Some Iceland supermarkets and Green King pubs are among those forced to close because so many staff are having to isolate. Our political reporter Shihab Khan reports on a country getting to grips with a new form of freedom.
3, 2, 1. It's been a long while coming, but this was the moment many have been waiting for. COVID restrictions lifted in their entirety in England, and for some, celebrating Freedom Day as it has been dubbed, lasted well into the night.
We're having a great time. We're out in London, finally. The world is finally coming back.
We've had a year of being locked in. I think it's important to go out, have a little fun.
I've got my first vaccine, so I'm not too scared, but I'm just excited to go out. I'm not really bothered about any safety, really.
We've not been able to have fun, and now we're back. So let's get back in there, come on!
So what's changed in England from today? There's now no legal requirement to wear masks, although they will be recommended in some spaces. All limits on social contact are gone. The guidance on working from home has been scrapped, and there's now no cap on numbers at events. There are concerns that easing restrictions will lead to a big spike in cases, but ministers this morning were adamant that now is the right time.
It is cautious, but I think the right step to take at this time. There is no perfect time to take step 4 and get our lives as close to normal as possible, but schools being out in the summer will bring a downward pressure on the R number, on the infection rates. That's a good thing. Obviously, there's an upward pressure because step 4 means more social interaction, but we have severely weakened the link between infection rates and hospitalisation.
But Labour is not supportive of the government's plans.
We're heading now for an NHS summer crisis. We will always support jobs and livelihoods, but Johnson's recklessness risks plunging us back into restrictions again. Freedom Day is just the latest in a long list of slogans not backed up by policy.
Cases have already been on the rise, resulting in hundreds of thousands being pinged to isolate by the NHS app, some of whom work for the National Health Service. But now fully vaccinated frontline NHS staff in England won't need to isolate if their absence could lead to a significant risk of harm. That's not the case, however, for all businesses, some of whom are struggling with so many staff off.
So we have either 20 to 25% of our team at the current time isolating, whether that's from being pinged by the app as part of this pingdemic, or that they've actually got COVID, or they're caring for people with COVID, or as kids off school. The impact of that is that, we're unable to launch new sites.
As restrictions are lifted today, in the latest unexpected twist, the Prime Minister won't be enjoying his newfound freedoms. He's isolating here at Chequers after he was in contact with the Health Secretary, who has COVID. He'll be hoping that when he emerges, life has gone back to some sort of normality. Shihab Khan, ITV News, Westminster.
There have also been changes in Scotland today, with the whole of the country now moved to level 0. But there are still some restrictions in place, including limits on the numbers who can gather indoors and outdoors. Face coverings remain compulsory in shops and on public transport, and hospitality venues still have to close at midnight. In Wales, the rules will remain the same until at least the 7th of August. And a decision over Northern Ireland's restrictions will be taken on Thursday over whether to ease restrictions as soon as next week. Let's turn to England, though, and get some reaction from a business that's been able to change the way it works overnight. Our correspondent Martha Fairley is outside a pub in North London. Martha, how's it looking there this lunchtime?
Well, it's a quiet Monday lunchtime, but things look pretty much the same today as they did yesterday. And that's because at this pub, they've decided they're going to stick with table service, that they're going to ask customers to wear masks when they're inside. And if customers do want to have a drink standing up, they're going to ask them to do that outside rather than inside. Now, with me is Jack Dignan, the landlord. I'm going to take my mask off now. Jack, first of all, why have you decided not to go with lifting all the restrictions?
The priority for us is the health and safety of myself, my family, my staff and our customers. We have a duty of care and we need to make sure we do the right things.
We've heard today that Green King say they've had to shut over 30 of their pubs because of staff shortages. How worried are you that you might have to close your business?
Very worried. If I get COVID, I'm going to have to close the pub and we'll lose money. The leaders of our industry should have been giving us more support to get financial backing for closures rather than trying to have this so-called Freedom Day.
And in terms of trying to strike that balance between making a profit as a business and actually staying safe, how difficult are the decisions you're making?
It was difficult, but safety for our health was more important than anything else, and I want to make sure that everyone does stay safe.
And how are the customers reacting to the choices that you're asking them to make?
The customers are fine about it. They understand. They will always be respectful to what we need to do, and it makes their life a lot easier as well.
And do you think that this is going to affect the amount of business that comes your way over the next few weeks?
Maybe slightly, but we need to do things the right way. And again, I hope people can be understanding about it and they can accept that they can stand outside and it will just be table service inside. OK,
Jack, well, thank you very much indeed. So far, a lot of the customers who have arrived have decided they are going to stand outside and have a who can blame on a lovely day like this.
Yeah, indeed, Martha. Thank you. Well, we've seen the celebrations of those who wanted the lockdown restrictions lifted, but for others, the changes have been far less welcome. Hannah Deacon has a rare illness and has been shielding throughout the pandemic. She is frightened by the steps that the government has taken today.
Probably the opposite of Freedom Day, as it's more, especially from the disabled community point of view, being dubbed as Exclusion Day, as we are excluded from the plan. We are having to kind of go backwards in what we can do. Things I did last week, I will be considering this week. Is it safe to do?
Well, joining me now is Sophie Corlett, who is Director of External Relations at the charity Mind. Sophie, thanks so much for talking to us this lunchtime. You know, so many people are calling it Freedom Day, but what does today mean for people like Hannah? And there are many of them, aren't there?
There are, and not just people who have conditions that mean that they're vulnerable to COVID, but a lot of people have mental health problems, experience anxiety, and a lot of people have experienced increased anxiety actually over this period. And one of the things that people have increasingly felt anxious about is the lifting of restrictions. So we know that this is a really big issue for people. We did a massive survey of 10,000 people, and 55% of them said that the lifting of restrictions was something that was brought anxiety to people. That was one of the biggest anxieties, the lifting of restrictions, and a slightly smaller number of people in terms of potentially developing COVID themselves. So people are obviously concerned for themselves, but also about whether they might bring COVID to somebody else. So it is a big issue for people, and we know that from our own experience on our advice lines, every set of easing of restrictions has led to an increase in people calling us or using our website because they are concerned about this next level of easing. So.
And you say that many people are contacting you because they have concerns. Previously, of course, they had that level or sense of security, at least, that we did have mandatory mask wearing. Of course, there was the social distancing rules. With that all gone now, that must be just having a huge impact on people.
Yes, that is a concern for people. So, as you know, we wear masks actually to protect other people, not to protect ourselves. And so, people are worried that they'll be going into environments where other people won't be wearing masks. So, we do encourage you, if you're going into areas where there may be people who may be anxious or worried, out of courtesy, if you can wear a mask, do consider wearing a mask to support other people. Not to restrict yourself, but to be able to allow other people to enjoy some of those freedoms.
Sophie, one final question to you. I mean, the advice at the moment is to people who are clinically vulnerable to continue to shield, but of course they're going to have to do that at a time when furlough will come to an end as well. That's the added pressure, isn't it, of not having that level of support going forward?
Yes, and we know that one of the groups that have suffered most significantly during this time are people who are on low incomes or living in poverty, who during the pandemic have had an additional £20 added to their universal credit, and we know that in October that's going to be taken away. We're really concerned about that. So, we're encouraging the government to not do that, to not take away that £20, but for people who, are experiencing that, furlough, finishing, all of these things are really going to add up.
All right.
So
Okay, well, listen, Sophie Collett, thank you so much for talking to us this lunchtime. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, let's pick up on some of those points with Dr. Deepti Gudasani, who's one of our regular epidemiologists here on ITV Lunchtime News. Deepti, thanks for joining us again. We just heard there one example, Hannah, who is clinically vulnerable. There will be many others for whom today does not bring a sense of joy, but a sense of genuine concern. With the restrictions lifted for many, the onus will be on them to protect themselves. What should they be doing today?
I mean, I think that's a difficult part about personal responsibility in the middle of a pandemic. There is not much you can do to protect yourself apart from shielding at home. If people around you aren't wearing masks on transport, in workplaces or in shops. I mean, people are now being asked to not go into shops at busy times, which is the opposite of freedoms for these people. And I think it's difficult to ask people to take any more precautions because they've already been asked to shield. I mean, I would urge the government to really reconsider what they're doing, because what they're essentially doing is discriminating against a fairly large group of people who are completely being hung out to dry in the midst of this.
What did you make, Deepti, of those pictures there? We saw people going into nightclubs looking very busy, not wearing face masks. We know that a country such as Israel have a great vaccination programme. They did the same thing, but they had to reimpose restrictions. How likely is it that you think that will happen here?
So, I mean, we are having about 1 in 90 people with infection right now. Our cases are surging about 50,000 a day. We saw this happen in the Netherlands when nightclubs were open. They saw massive surges in infection, even with testing prior to entry. And, here we may not even have that around many nightclubs. And these are super spreader events, especially when community transmission is so high. So I think we are looking at very large surges in cases over the coming weeks. And I'm really concerned about where that will lead us. I mean, our own CMO is saying that we're headed towards a lockdown in 5 weeks. So it really kind of begs the question why we're doing this at this point in time when it's not in line with the science or in line with public health or even in line with the public sentiment at this point in time.
But Deepti, what the government would say is, we have had a highly successful vaccination programme. Something like 60% of the population now fully vaccinated. If we don't start doing it now, when are we going to start getting back to normal for our economy, for everyone's mental health generally?
I think there's an easy answer to that. So it's actually 54% of our entire population, including children, that have been vaccinated, which means many, many people are going to get infected over the coming weeks. Hospitalizations and deaths are not the only outcome. Long COVID exists, and we are being told that 500,000 people are likely to develop long COVID over the coming weeks when they could have been vaccinated and protected. So the time to do this is when many, many more people can be offered vaccines, by which I mean all adults and adolescents, offered 2 doses of the vaccine alongside preparations over the summer for school opening, making schools safer with masks and ventilation, bringing cases down, putting our test, trace and isolate system back in the hands of local authorities who can handle it much better, and supporting people with isolation. We need a multi-pronged approach. Just relying on half the population being vaccinated is not enough.
Dr. Deepti Gudasani, thank you again. Thank you. Well, let's speak to our political editor now, Robert Peston. Robert, the government said today's changes were here to stay, but there's still plenty of questions, aren't there? Do you think that we're going to see tweaks going forward?
So, look, Prime Minister originally billed today as Freedom Day. I wrote in a blog today, it feels a bit more like Chaos Day. There are sort of three issues, aren't there? We've heard about how anxious the clinically vulnerable, those whose immune systems are impaired, feel about leaving home. Government has changed tack on that. Although they have abolished the legal requirement to social distance and wear masks, they are now encouraging us to wear masks. But, you know, many of the clinically vulnerable say they still don't feel protected enough. Second, lots of businesses are saying staff are not turning up because they've either got the infection or have been told they've been in close contact. Hundreds of thousands of people being forced to stay home. Supermarkets warning that they can't operate properly. They may have to close early. Questions about whether the stocks will be properly filled. We've got a press conference this afternoon from the Prime Minister. Lots of people hoped that he would announce that the sensitivity of the app which pings people would be changed. I understand actually the app is not going to be changed, but I think there may be the application of these daily testing pilots to more key workers that would mean that people essential to the running of the economy may be able to go to work rather than stay at home. It's only small comfort for others who will be forced to stay at home. Then finally, 50,000 infections a day at the moment, and the rate of infection is rising really fast. Talking to the experts who advise the government, they tell me in 10 days we could be seeing 100,000 infections a day, even 150,000 not long after that. Now, the damage to the economy would be significant if businesses can't operate properly. But equally, hospitals are filling up again. You know, we are expecting, according to the experts, 3,000 entries to hospitals per day. Not deaths, but massive disruption to the health service, which is why, absent further measures from the government, this will continue to be chaotic.
All right, Robert, for now, thank you. Well, there's so much more of what's changed on our website. Head to itv.com/news for all the details. Moving on, at least 5 people have died in separate drowning incidents across England as the country experienced the hottest weekend of the year so far. Incidents occurred across the country, from Croyd Beach in North Devon to Salford Quays in Greater Manchester. There were 3 separate incidents in Yorkshire, including in Wakefield, where a search is still underway in Pugneys Country Park. Well, Katie Oscroft is there. Katie, what is happening there now?
Well, very worrying news here after the hot weekend, which so many people took advantage of. Behind these locked gates, the quite distressing scenes of an underwater search of the vast lake which this country park is set around. The emergency services have been here since 1 o'clock yesterday afternoon. They were called to reports of a man in difficulties in the water. The park was closed, it remained shut, and a steady stream of cars are being turned away whilst this search goes on. And of course, as you say, this is by no means the only incident of this hot weekend. South Yorkshire Police, who recovered the body of a man from a lake in a park in Sheffield at midnight, have reiterated the warnings about the dangers of taking a dip in open water as temperatures rise. Well, these tragedies really do underline that the water, which looks so inviting on a day like this, can be so dangerous.
All right, Katie in Wakefield, thank you. Well, from hot weather here to the massive floods that have swept through Central Europe. At least 188 people in Germany and Belgium are now known to have died, with rescue crews continuing to sift through wreckage. Sally Biddulph has the latest.
5 days on from the floods that engulfed Western Germany, a neighbour delivers essential supplies to a friend. There is no electricity or running water in Joglauer's home in Ahrweiler. The floods swept through here, laying waste to everything.
20 Zentimeter im Wasser gestanden.
Still shaking, he says the water rose by a metre in minutes. First, I picked up my wife and walked to the door. The water was then at my knees. Then I went back to my bedroom to get some documents, and the water had reached my thighs. I couldn't ever imagine how fast the water would rise if I hadn't seen it myself. Now, like thousands of others, Jörg does not know how he will rebuild his home and his life in a disaster which has so far killed more than 180 people. Meanwhile, across the border in eastern Belgium, the floodwaters are receding, but their impact is equally devastating. For 200 years, this house was home to generations of the same family. A few days ago, it was almost totally submerged, with those who lived there seeking refuge on higher ground. They're now leaving for good.
I turned the page. It's too difficult for me, very. So it's not possible to live here anymore.
In nearby Pepinster, rescue crews are still clearing through debris and using sniffer dogs to try to find survivors.
We've
received information from local residents who have heard noises, says Olivier Guest, a fireman. He says they've heard shouting, rather softly, from a person who is said to still be under the rubble. The scale of this rescue and recovery operation is vast, with hundreds still missing. Sally Biddulph, ITV News.
And finally, the cyclist Mark Cavendish has been telling ITV News how he has managed to create history even against his own expectations. The 36-year-old was considering giving up a year ago, but he pushed on with his training and has just completed the Tour de France, equalling the record for stage wins in the process. Today, he told us he couldn't give up the rush of racing.
Yeah, this time last year, I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know if I didn't think I'd be at the Tour de France again. I didn't know if I was going to continue my career. Obviously, after many years, it takes your toll. Just to feel part of a racing team, you know, it gives you a buzz, it gives you a will, it gives you a desire to get on your bike every day and ultimately have fun. And when you have fun, you're less stressed and you can perform better.
And that is it this lunchtime. I am back with the evening news at 6:30. The news where you are follows the national weather. But from everyone here for now, bye-bye.